Nope.
I recently got my first real job out of college, and it felt like I was on top of the world. Sadly, that feeling was short-lived. After what I've seen, the last thing I want to do is step foot back into that school. Hell, I don't even want to live in this state anymore. Not as long as that thing is here. For security purposes, I won't be using any real names. I got hired at a middle school in the Chicago public school system. I would be joining the staff as a teacher's assistant to an existing 7th grade teacher, Maria Tomas. Things started off pretty well. Maria was nice, the students seemed to like her, and the class structure was easy to learn. I began at the start of the school year in early September. It wasn't until mid-November that Maria announced to the staff and students that she was with child. Over time, as you'd expect, her stomach grew larger and larger, approaching her expected delivery date in early April. She never seemed to complain about her pregnancy. Every day at lunch, she would leave the campus and come back smelling weird, for lack of a better word. It was like she had been at a barbecue, with her clothes smelling smoky. I chalked it up to her ethnic family, who she said lived nearby. I assumed she was going there to eat lunch, and I didn't want to sound insensitive or ignorant by remarking on the odd smells that emanated from her clothes every afternoon. After months of this routine, she declared her last day before beginning her maternity leave would be Friday, March 23rd, roughly a week prior to her due date. Pushing it pretty close, I thought to myself. I was just hoping her water wouldn't prematurely break while I was standing anywhere near her. Luckily, that never happened. Eventually, Friday, March 23rd rolled around. By now, the students were giving off a weird energy. It was similar to the buzz you'd feel at the end of the school year, right before summer, but mixed with a bittersweet tinge, since some of the students were clearly upset about their favorite teacher leaving them. That was the sentiment of the well-behaved kids. On the flip side, there were the more difficult students. Those who saw this as the authority of their classes stepping down, only to have a weak-willed, apathetic substitute to fill her shoes for the rest of the school year. One kid in particular, Raymond, was having a field day. While he was usually a pain in the ass to some degree, he was taking his shit to new heights that day. I love kids, and I would never harm one, but Raymond was testing my code of ethics. He needed a nice, open palm smack to the head, real bad. The classes were structured in a way where the students would have the same teacher for several subjects throughout the day, depending on what team they were on. It was just a way to keep things organized for the administrative staff, but it also meant if you had a bad egg in the bunch, odds are you'd have to deal with that bad egg multiple times a day. Raymond was in 3 classes with Maria. English in the morning, and social studies and literature in the afternoon. Literature was the last class of the day, and seeing as it was just shy of the weekend, Raymond's disruptive behavior switched to overdrive. While other students read out loud, he was consistently speaking over them, tossing small pieces of crumpled up paper around the room, and even going so far as to play music off of his phone. Sadly, due to the so-called progressive restrictions and rules instituted by the Chicago public school system, there was very little we could do to curb his rowdy conduct. I wanted to step in so bad, but I was hesitant to step on Maria's toes. So I grit my teeth and followed her lead. Finally, she spoke up. "Raymond, can you keep it together for just 20 more minutes? Class is almost out." Raymond looked up with a sheepish grin before replying. "Oh yeah, no problem," he remarked sarcastically. "Miss Tubby. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant Miss Tomas." He began to snicker to himself, clearly proud of the extremely lackluster insult. While I was angry on Maria's behalf, I was comforted by the obvious denouncing of his behavior by the other students. I assume he was expecting a reaction, but instead the class mostly just stayed silent, except for a few of the girls giving him looks of disgust. "Whatever, man, y'all are stupid," Raymond said, clearly embarrassed by his failure of a joke. Maria just smiled at this before clearing her throat and calmly stating, "Let's continue." The class eventually wrapped up, and Maria said a brief and heartfelt goodbye to her students. Everyone gathered their stuff and began to head out, when Maria abruptly shouted, "Raymond, you wait. I want to speak with you." Raymond rolled his eyes, sighed, and begrudgingly walked over to Maria's desk. I was still packing up my stuff in the corner of the room when this all began to unfold. I admittedly slowed down so I can eavesdrop on the conversation, secretly hoping Maria would go crazy on this shitty little kid, but knowing that probably wouldn't be the case. Maria began speaking to Raymond. "All year, you've been a problem, Raymond. All year, you've made your classes unnecessarily difficult. All year, you've disrespected me, your other teachers, and bullied your classmates. All year, instead of disciplining you, I took pity on you. I've tried to level with you. I've gone out of my way to try and help you, hoping you'd come around. So tell me, Raymond, have you learned anything from this year? Do you feel bad about how you've behaved? Do you feel anything at all? Or are you just a waste of space like everybody in this school thinks you are?" That last line caught both Raymond and myself by surprise. The harsh line seemed to come from nowhere. My eyes widened as I quickly began to pick up the pace. Suddenly I wasn't feeling so nosy, and instead just wanted to escape the awkward situation that was folding in front of me. I looked up and noticed Raymond's former look of pseudo-confidence had changed to one of objection and defensiveness. "Screw you, you fat cow!" he barked back, turning around to grab his backpack off the floor. Within the blink of an eye, Maria had her hand around Raymond's wrist. "No one will ever miss you, you know," Maria said, her voice uncharacteristically monotone. "What are you doing? You can't touch me! Let go of me right now!" Raymond demanded, trying his hardest to break free of her grip. Raymond was bigger than average for his age, and Maria was smaller than average for hers. So the fact that he couldn't get her to so much as budge as he pulled with all his might caused shivers to run down my spine. Maria simply stared at him with little to no emotion on her face. Naturally, I felt the need to try and de-escalate the situation. Not so much because I felt bad for Raymond, but more because I was worried about the legal ramifications that may affect Maria if she took this too far. "Mrs. Tomas, take it easy. Let's just take a breath for a second," I pleaded. Maria snapped her head in my direction. That was the first time I got a good look at her eyes. It's hard to explain, but they looked wrong. Right off the bat, they looked darker, literally and figuratively. It was as if they were bloodshot, but with a very dark shade of red. Darker than I've ever seen someone's eyes get. In addition, they weren't looking directly at me. They were only looking in my direction. Before I could even respond, Maria began to speak. "Thank you for your help this year, Mr. Choops. No need to stick around. We can take care of things from here." "We?" I asked, puzzled. With that, Maria's eyes rolled back into her head, with the entire white of them turning the same dark red color. At the sight of this, Raymond began to scream and tug even harder, still to no avail. In a panic for the safety of the student, I began to approach the two, hoping I could help Raymond break free from her grip. I took one step before Maria screamed at me. The voice was no longer her own, and it made my blood run cold.
"Keep your distance, Mr. Choops,"
she stated. I couldn't disobey even if I wanted to. I froze in place at the sound of her voice. Raymond continued to struggle. I just wanted it all to end. Before I could think of my next move, something else began to happen. With the nauseating sound of flesh being torn, I saw a small abrasion form under the middle of Maria's lip. It quickly began to spread down her chin, through her neck, and into her torso, until it reached the bottom of her large, pregnant stomach. Blood began to run down the large wound. I stared in awe and terror, hardly believing the grotesque scene in front of me. When I thought things couldn't get any worse, they did. I watched in horror as two tiny red hands began to ease their way through the gory fissure on Maria's stomach. Hands turned to arms, arms turned to a head, and a head turned into a face. The face of a fully developed baby. The baby slowly exited Maria's stomach, being raised up by unnatural limbs and organs that connected to it. Maria's body was now opened up like the mouth of a Venus flytrap. I began to shake uncontrollably, with all the feelings to my limbs leaving me. By now, Raymond was collapsed to the floor as if he had no bones, wetting himself with tears falling from his eyes and unintelligible mumbling falling from his lips. This baby, if you can even call it that, looked down at the panic-stricken preteen that laid before it. Not wasting any time, the baby made its way closer to the boy, pulling Maria's body along with it. In one smooth motion, the opening of Maria's exposed insides wrapped around Raymond, with the baby wrapping its tiny body around his face, stifling one last scream. I felt the bile rise in my stomach as I watched Maria's monstrous form slowly engulf her student, the sound of crunching and cracking filling the room. I was still able to hear his muffled scream for several seconds, before a dreadful silence filled the space. After that, all I could hear was my heart pounding and my ears ringing. I sat there, too scared to move, watching Maria's now still body lay face down in the same spot Raymond laid moments prior. For a brief moment, I thought the mutilation of her body had killed her too. It only made sense after all. Who can survive being ripped open like that, regardless of how it happened? I was wrong. Maria's head once again snapped in my direction. Her eyes were still a deep red. With a twisted smile, she raised a finger to her lips.
Shh.
Our little secret, Mr. Choops, she said, her voice slowly returning to her. With that, I finally lost consciousness, passing out on the classroom floor. I was woken up a few hours later by a member of the janitorial staff. As soon as he spoke, I jolted up off the ground, looking around wildly. He begged me to calm down and take a seat so I can collect myself. When he had asked me what had happened, I told him I didn't know. I ended up blaming it on the flu, even though I felt fine, and he suggested I go to the hospital as soon as possible. I told him I'd go, just to get him off my back. I couldn't tell him what I had seen, not that he would even believe me. I got home and took a cold shower, trying to convince myself that what I had seen was not real. It couldn't be. It had to be a nightmare. I spent most of that weekend drunk, trying to forget what I had seen, or dreamed, that afternoon. By the time Monday rolled around, I could barely bring myself to get to school. I did, though. I had to. It was my job, after all. And I couldn't let what was most likely a nightmare ruin that for me. So I showered up, changed, chugged some coffee, and made my way to class. I met the substitute and sat down as she called attendance. When she got to Raymond, there was no one there to say here. He was absent. He was absent for 2 days before word got out that he had gone missing. The parents were questioned. We all were questioned. From what I heard, even Maria was questioned, since she was the last person many of the students saw Raymond with. I'm sure she had an alibi, and I'm sure they took her at her word. After all, what could an almost 9-month pregnant middle school teacher do? They still haven't found him, or recovered his body. I'm the only one in the school who knows why. There is no body to find. It was taken by that thing inside Maria. Her baby. Update. I haven't been sleeping lately. I abruptly quit my job a few days ago. My performance was noticeably worse, and I was risking getting fired anyway. I was going to wait until I was fired so I can collect unemployment, but that plan changed when I heard the news. Maria had delivered her baby. A healthy, beautiful baby girl. Everyone was ecstatic for her. Everyone but me. I've seen her already. I know what she is. And I was not going to stick around this city long enough for everyone else to figure it out. I'm heading south now. Not sure where exactly, and I don't care. I just want to put as much distance between me and that thing as possible. And if you live in the Chicago area, or even in Illinois, or even in the Midwest of America, I highly suggest you do the same. Hello, dear listener. Thank you for joining me in this week's video. If you enjoyed it, you know what to do. Smack that like button, subscribe, share it with a friend, turn on notifications, all of that jazz, man. Do it! I hope you enjoyed this story. It was an original story written for Mother's Day. Hopefully it wasn't too disturbing, but also hopefully it was, and I hope you guys all have nightmares. And I was pretty nasally throughout all of it. I tried to wait until my sinuses cleared up from this freaking cold that I'm having again. I've been sick for like a month, people. Please bear with me. Until next time, everybody, remember to stay safe out there. I'll be seeing you in the next video.